Welcome to another WC Sports podcast. I'm Colton. Wyatt over here going to do some podcasting again with us. I'm back. Was sick. Wyatt did a couple videos without me, but happy to be back and get a good podcast in. Going to be a little bit of a longer one after all the Sunday games, which we're going to talk about today. Bills and Chiefs, Steelers and Ravens, and more. Top fantasy football players that during Week 11. NFL news. Don't have a lot to say there, but Thursday Night Football this week. NASCAR and NBA stuff, so it's going to be a fun one. I'm going to grade some off-season pickups, but a lot of fun stuff going to go on in this podcast, so let's get into it. How are you doing, Wyatt?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Good. Excited to do another podcast, but let's start off with Week 11 football games. Throughout the week, field goals were tough to come by. It was pretty strange seeing guys like Justin Tucker, who is probably the best kicker of all time, struggling, missing two, except for Chris Boswell, who was 6 for 6. We'll talk about in that a little bit. What do you think about the missed field goals?
Yeah, it's interesting that that's happening. Field goals can determine outcome of the game is often depending on the field goals. So you just need to get those right, and I think that their job is just to kick the ball. You're getting paid a lot of money just to kick a football. I mean, it's pretty hard, but that's something that you really need to have down, especially when that's your job and your team really depends on you and for the win there, and it's important. Kickers, they're very important to the game, so it's interesting that they had a rough week.
Yeah, it's the one thing you have to work on. I think I agree. It's your job. You have to make kicks. Your teammates depend on winning games from you sometimes. And I know guys like Patrick Mahomes win games a lot, but you have guys where he depends on his kicker sometimes. He's the best quarterback in the league, and he'll depend on his kicker, so you need to do your job. So, speaking of Patrick Mahomes, let's talk about the Bills game. Bills versus Chiefs. Bills finally take down the Chiefs 30-21, and make the Chiefs go from undefeated to finally defeated, 9-0 to 9-1. Bills did a great job with their defense, making Patrick Mahomes scramble, just making them uncomfortable throughout the game. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that was some good moves by the Bills. They obviously had that enormous run by Josh Allen. I thought he was going to get tackled several times in the run, but he's still able to make it to the end zone, and there is an interception. So that was also interesting too. That really sealed the deal for the game. So there's an excellent performance by both the Bills' offense and defense. And so I think that definitely made the Chiefs struggle quite a bit. And the Bills, they had good standings in the season. Chiefs were obviously the more favorites compared to standings and everything. So it was really a shocker that this team was able to take down the Chiefs. But that's definitely good for them. And it definitely shows that they're a main competitor in the season.
Yeah, good word there. Patrick Mahomes, speaking of interception, had 2 interceptions, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 196 passing yards, almost 200, but they kept him under that. Josh Allen, like you said, had that big run. I think he played with a kind of fire that I'd never seen him play before against the Chiefs in past years in the playoffs or in the regular season. So that was really cool to see him doing good. My dad's a Bills fan, and he was excited to see that. You were over watching that game. The Bills' defense, like we said, made the Chiefs' offense struggle. They like you said, Patrick Mahomes not with a great passing day. He was close to Josh Allen, but Josh Allen with 262 passing yards, a passing touchdown and a rushing touchdown and an interception. So pretty even stats there. James Cook, he had that opening drive touchdown, which I think set the tone for the rest of the game for the Bills. He had only 20 rushing yards, but 2 touchdowns. Khalil Shakir with 8 receptions and 70 receiving yards. Kareem Hunt, 60 rushing yards. Xavier Worthy, 61 receiving yards on 4 receptions and 8 touchdowns. Yeah, anything more to say on the Chiefs game?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting game. So the Chiefs, obviously, I think they've been depending in past weeks heavily on the second half of the game. They've been struggling a little bit in the first half of the game. They've had to play cat and mouse in the second half, and I think that's something that the Bills are just trying to force out of them. They're showing that you can't really do that. You can't depend on your performance in the second half to win games, so I think that's definitely a wake-up call for the Chiefs from the Bills.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, whoever wins this game makes it farther in the playoffs, makes it in the playoffs, gets the 1 seed possibly. Do you think that because the Bills beat the Chiefs, they have a better advantage? They might get top playoff spot, not have to play them till the AFC Championship or at all. But do you think this changes the outcome of the playoff picture at all?
Yeah, I think the Bills, going into the season, I wasn't directly thinking they would be in the playoffs or the Super Bowl, but they definitely proved that wrong. They're a main competitor. They're not going to have any trouble making it to the playoffs, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I thought they had a good chance of making it to the playoffs. I think a lot of people did. Some people thought they wouldn't because they'd lost Stephon Diggs. Other wide receivers, they didn't have a lot of good wide receivers. So, yeah, good word there. Top 3 fantasy people for each team. Josh Allen, 23.98 points. Had the most for the Bills. James Cook with 19.7. And Curtis Samuel with third. Hadn't said his name yet this year. He had 16.8. Which is how much the number 1 for the Chiefs had, Xavier Worthy. He also had 16.8, Mahomes 15.84, and a big drop here. Kareem Hunt had the third most points. He had 6 points, so not very good for him. Let's move on to the Steelers and the Ravens game. Steelers won 18-16, keeping that top spot in the division. All of the Steelers, 18 points for Chris Boswell field goals. 6 field goals for Chris Boswell. But it was a defensive game. Ravens having great defense. Obviously, they have a top defense in the league. But Patrick Queen playing great against his former team. So a great game there. Lamar Jackson couldn't get the offense going. Previous week, he had gotten it going, beat the Bengals in a thriller on Thursday Night Football last week. How do you think he can put this game behind him and play like he did on Thursday Night Football in future games?
Yeah, so I think recognizing that they're forced to be reckoned with. They're a very aggressive team that can pull a lot off, and I think that's what they can do again. They defeated a really good team, so I think they just had a really off week, so they can recognize that that's not how they perform every week and that they can easily perform better than that. That was just a struggling week for them.
Yeah, I agree with that. Lamar Jackson couldn't get the offense going, like I said, but I think the big thing that cost Baltimore the game, they were down by 2 points at the end. They could have probably won if Justin Tucker had made his field goals. He missed 2 out of his 3 field goals. They would have been up by 4 if he had made those, and the Steelers, I know they had a chance. They were just trying to get the first down at the end of the game to seal the game. They could have gone for the touchdown. Maybe they would have gotten the touchdown and won the game. But what are your thoughts on Justin Tucker, who was considered the best kicker in the league probably ever in the NFL? He is probably still. He's just having a down year, but he's missing field goals all year from like 50 plus, even less. So what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, it's interesting that's happening, but I guess maybe when you're near the end of your career, you start to perform a little bit less, but I think he can bounce back from that. He doesn't need to think that way. He doesn't have to think that this is near the end of his career. He can just really try and start working hard on making good kicks.
Yeah, I agree. I think at the start of the season, he started missing them. I think he got in his head and was like, I can't miss field goals. It's so hard. Now I think he's like, oh, man, I keep missing field goals. What am I going to do? And I think he's just got to focus on he's a really good kicker, and he can make kicks. So Wilson had 205 passing yards and interception. Touchdown stats because Chris Boswell got all their points. Najee Harris, 63 yards. George Pickens, 89 receiving yards. Lamar Jackson had 207 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Derrick Henry with 65 rushing yards and a touchdown. Isaiah Likely with 4 receptions for 75 yards. And then top 3 fantasy performers for each team. Chris Boswell had the most fantasy points for the Steelers with 24. George Pickens second, 16.9. Najee Harris third, 13.3. And then for the Ravens, Lamar Jackson 1 for 14.88. Zay Flowers second with 11.9, and Derrick Henry third with 10.5. So a very entertaining game there. That was in the first segment of games. Bills was after that. Let's talk about the Packers and Bears. Very entertaining game. Packers came in with a 6-3 record, left with a 7-3 record. Bears lose yet again with the rookie quarterback, Caleb Williams, who's the first overall draft pick in the 2024 draft. Packers win 20-19 because of a blocked field goal. Cairo Santos lines up. It was a pretty easy field goal. Might have been a little more than 40 yards. He had made all his field goals that day, throughout the day. But the guy comes straight through the middle, puts his hand up, tips it, and ends the game. Packers win by a blocked field goal. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the Bears, they had a good draft pick at the beginning of the season, but it's interesting to see that they're starting to struggle on performing right now.
Yeah, I agree. Caleb Williams, obviously very young quarterback, first year out of college, does have to learn, but guys like Jane Daniels and even Bo Nix have been performing. People would hope they would, so I think he's just got to learn a little more. Bryce Young, I'm a Panthers fan, I'm a little biased, but I think Bryce Young just He's starting to learn from Andy Dalton. He's obviously won 2 games in a row. This was their bye week. They played the Chiefs next week at home, so I have a friend going to that game. Hopefully they can win that game. But I'm back to the topic of Packers and Bears. DJ Moore finally having a decent game. He got a lot of touches, playing good. I know it wasn't the best week still. He's not performing to the way people thought he would this year, but I think it was a positive game for him. Jair Alexander, probably their best defensive player for the Packers, left with an injury, didn't return. Bears, like I said, need to start winning games. They lost to the Patriots, get blown out of the water, who aren't even that great of a team. I know Drake May is producing probably a little more than Caleb Williams, but still doesn't have the same amount of weapons. Colts and Jets. Jets struggling. They fired their head coach, Robert Saleh, earlier in the year, and I think they fired their GM this week. Might have been today, but they're just cleaning out the staff house after a disappointing season, going from 3-7 to 3-8. And the Colts get back to 500 with a 5-5 record after this game. They benched Anthony Richardson, put Joe Flacco in. Now they benched Joe Flacco and put Anthony Richardson in. Their second-year quarterback was a 4th overall draft pick last year. Didn't perform the way they wanted. Performed great in this game. Had 272 passing yards, 1 passing touchdown, and 2 rushing touchdowns. Makes up for Jonathan Taylor, who had 24 attempts, only 57 yards. And then Josh Downs with 5 receptions for 84 yards and a touchdown. What I think's interesting is Aaron Rodgers couldn't get the passing game going to Devontae Adams, Garrett Wilson, other receivers. They just couldn't get the passing game going. And like I said, Anthony Richardson with a very positive return game. But what I think was good is Breece Hall finally with a great fantasy game. I think he was a little disappointing in fantasy. It was a top 5 overall projected pick. I think he was like 4th or something at the start of the year. Finally produces, gets 31.1 points, and led the Jets. And then Jonathan Taylor, quiet again. So what do you think the Jets could do to actually start winning games? I know they kind of think their season's over, but what do you think they can do to maybe get planned for next season, or like maybe even start winning games this year?
I guess not really clean anything out now. You don't need to clean out the staff house now. That's going to make a lot of changes, and it's going to be more difficult to work with newer members of the Jets team.
Yeah, I think Aaron Rodgers is 40 years old now. Said he's not going to retire this year. I think he should, but I think maybe even in this draft, you draft a really good quarterback in the first round, maybe put him behind Aaron Rodgers so he can learn, put him in next season. I know that's what the Falcons are doing with Michael Penix. They have Kirk Cousins, who isn't as old, but we'll talk about that in a second. Top 3 fantasy performers for the Colts: Anthony Richardson with 28.08, Josh Downs with 19.4, and their kicker, Matt Gay, with 14 points. Breece Hall obviously won, we said, with 31.1, Aaron Rodgers second with 16.06, and Devontae Adams third with 13.2. Didn't see almost anything of Garrett Wilson. Saw targets but no catches. Next, Seahawks and 49ers. We were watching that. Seahawks, Geno Smith wins game with his legs. Rushes in for the touchdown to go up by 3, and then they leave the 49ers with 13 seconds left to do stuff. So what do you think? Geno Smith did good about that game. JSN outperforms DK Metcalf in DK's last game back. Starting to look like a wide receiver 1. I wouldn't say that yet. DK Metcalf's still their 1. But what do you think? That the Seahawks did good that game to win over their division rivals, the 49ers, and pass them in the conference.
Yeah, it's really interesting how the Seahawks flipped the table right at the end of the game. That was really impressive. I know they've probably been struggling a little bit this season, so it's good to see that they're getting back into it. And the 49ers, I know they did really good. They went to the Super Bowl last year, so it's interesting to see that they're struggling a little bit against teams that are just average teams. So I think they need to start stepping up their game a little bit, the 49ers.
Yeah, Juwan Jennings with a great game. McCaffrey with another mediocre game. Not looking terrible, but not looking great. And the 49ers, like you said, not looking Super Bowl caliber this year. 5-5 with an even record. Geno Smith, 221 passing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, and 1 interception. Kenneth Walker with 14 attempts at rushing, 54 yards and a touchdown. And Jackson Smith and Jigba, 10 receptions for 110 yards. Great job by him. Brock Purdy with 159 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Chris McCaffrey with 19 attempts, 79 rushing yards. And like I said, Juwan Jennings, 10 receptions, 91 yards, and a touchdown. So good game there. Your top fantasy performers for that week was Seahawks. Number 1 was Jackson Smith and Jigba with 21.8. Geno Smith, number 2, with 15.74. DK Metcalf, number 3, with 14 points. 49ers, number 1 was Jawan Jennings with 25.1. Number 2, Brock Purdy with 18.36. And number 3, Christian McCaffrey with 14.6. So great game there. So let's take a break in the middle of our games. We have a little more to talk about, but NFL news. I have a few notes on the news. New York Giants, they come out of their bye week and they bench their starting quarterback, Daniel Jones. They're going to play their second-year quarterback, Tommy DeVito, is expected to play. What do you think about that, benching your starting quarterback? I know you had a decent start to the season. Now you're 2-8. You've lost a lot of games coming off of their bye week and losing to the Panthers before in Germany.
Yeah, I think benching your starter quarterback who has more experience than the secondary quarterback is a risky move. So unless their starter is not performing at all like they hope he would, it's probably not going to be a good move. So it either could be a really good move or it could be a really bad move. So there's a lot of risk in doing that there, but it's definitely high tensions. So I don't know whether that'll work out for them or if it'll just be, I guess, not affect them at all. So I think it's definitely a risky move to make. You'd really have to think that your starter quarterback is not performing how you want him to. So that's definitely an interesting decision.
Yeah, Daniel Jones was a super high draft pick back in 2019. Throughout his career, it's not been performing how they want him to. Their head coach said that he was going to stick with Daniel Jones. He's going to be the starting quarterback. Then he goes out and benches him. So shows, not the loyalty there. Isaiah Pacheco, he's expected, their Chiefs starting running back, got hurt early in the season. Isaiah Pacheco, he's expected to make his return against the Panthers this week. And they were talking about Justin Tucker. Jim Harbaugh says they're staying with Justin Tucker and won't trial any other kickers. So even though he's missing field goals, they're going to stick with him and hope that he plays good, which I think is a good move. I'm just going to go over the division leaders right now coming into Week 12. Leading the AFC East, obviously the Buffalo Bills with a 9-2 record. Leading the AFC North is the Pittsburgh Steelers, 8-2. Leading the AFC South is the Texans with a 7-4 record. We'll talk about the Monday night game in a second. AFC West, Chiefs, 9-1. NFC East, Eagles, 8-2. NFC North, Lions, 9-1. NFC South, Falcons, 6-5. Anyone's game for this one. And the NFC West, as the Cardinals, are 6-4. Just talked about the Seahawks and 49ers, who are both people in that conference. Next, like I just said, we're going to talk about the Monday Night Football game last night. So I watched that first half. Just have a couple brief things to talk about that game. Joe Mixon, with a great game, had 3 total touchdowns. I had him in fantasy football. He was obviously the number one performer, 35.8 points. Cowboys continue to struggle with a 3-7 record, I think it is now. Just Dak Prescott being out for their season, their starting quarterback, backup quarterback not performing like they want him to. So just a quick note on that. Good game there. Texans still performing like they wanted to with their second-year quarterback. Next, let's talk about the Rams and Patriots. Rams versus Patriots. Rams win 28-22. Drake made the 3rd overall draft pick this draft, the starting quarterback for the Patriots. Looking pretty good, but I think the Rams wide receivers won that game. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, both performing really well, both with great receiving games. Puka Nacua, 7 receptions, 123 yards, and 1 touchdown. Matthew Stafford, 3 for 4 touchdowns and almost 300 yards. Drake May, like I said, looks good as a young rookie, but needs to make better decisions, just lobbing it down the field at the end of the game for the interception. He had 2 touchdowns, interception, just not a great move. Almost had 300 yards, only 13 under Matthew Stafford. Ramondre Stevenson, 73 rushing yards, and Kendrick Bourne didn't get a single snap on the field. Last game, comes back, 5 receptions, 70 yards, and a touchdown. So not a lot to say about that game. Rams' top 3 fantasy people were Cooper Kupp, number 1, 28.6. Matthew Stafford, number 2, 27.8. And Puka Nacua, number 3, with 25.3. Patriots, Kendrick Bourne, number 1, 18 points. Drake May, number 2, 17.98. Hunter Henry, number 3, 12.3. Next, Jaguars and Lions. Absolute blowout game. Jaguars lose to the Lions 52-6. They go to 2-8. Lions go up to 9-1. Arguably the best team in the league right now. Lions look Super Bowl caliber. What do you have to say on that? I know you like the Lions. Think they're a good Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, last year they got defeated in the playoffs. They didn't make it to the Super Bowl. I was disappointed about that. So it's good to see them one of the top games in the league this year. So that's exciting to see. They completely smoked the Jaguars. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, great game there. We have Jared Goff redeems himself. Last game, I believe it was Sunday Night Football. He threw 4 touchdowns this game. Jones, 138 yards and 1 interception, continues to be a terrible quarterback. 27 rushing yards for Travis Etienne Jr. Brian Thomas Jr., 5 receptions for 82 yards, that rookie first-round draft pick. The Lions keep the rushing game going. David Montgomery had 2 touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs had a touchdown as well, all 3 rushing touchdowns. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 161 receiving yards on 11 receptions and 2 touchdowns. Had David Montgomery and Amon-Ra St. Brown in fantasy. Had a great fantasy week. 216 points. Yeah, I think the Jaguars season is over. They're 2-8 record. They're last in the conference. Trevor Lawrence is hurt. Should come back soon. Mac Jones just not playing how they could. Can't get the rushing game going. One of their 2 great wide receivers is out for the season. They only have 1 more left. I think their season's done. So what do you think about the Jaguars?
Yeah, I agree with that. They've definitely been struggling this season, and when you get blown out of the water like that, it's going to be really hard for you to come back really against any other team in any future week.
Yeah, week before, they only lost by 5 points to the Vikings, who are another good team, but play the Vikings division rivals Lions, lose by 46 points. Their head coach said he's not going to fire anybody. He's just going to keep the staff. He didn't specifically say he wasn't going to fire anybody. He said he's going to be cautious and just keep going. Raiders and Dolphins. My brother's favorite team is the Dolphins. Dolphins win 34-19 to improve to 4-6. Raiders go down to 2-8. Another one of those teams, so I think are out. Raiders, though. Brock Bowers, great tight end. 13 receptions, 126 yards, 1 tight end. He's a rookie tight end from Georgia. Tua and the Finns starting to look like their old selves. Raiders still struggling at quarterback. Gardner Minshew not doing good still. Brock Bowers with a career day, like I said. Just going to skim through this game. Raiders' top 3 performers, Brock Bowers, 31.3. Gardner Minshew, 2, 17.98. 3, Amir Abdullah, 10.7. Weird. Amir Abdullah, didn't expect him to be there. He had a touchdown, though. Dolphins, number 1, Jonnu Smith with 28.1 points. He had 2 touchdowns on the day. Tua, 23.52. He had 3 passing touchdowns, 2 of them to Jonnu Smith. And then I think one of them was to Devon A-Chain, who's number 3 with 20.5. So a good fantasy day for the Dolphins as usual. Next, Browns and Saints. Jameis Winston with a good game. Even with the loss, they lost 14-35. Looking at the score, you're like, oh, they're not doing good at all. But Jameis Winston playing good. So's Jerry Jeudy, 6 receptions, 142 yards, and 1 touchdown. Nick Chubb only 50 rushing yards, but still good game for them. But what I want to talk about is Taysom Hill. He listed as a tight end, but he plays quarterback, he plays running back, he plays wide receiver, he plays tight end. He could basically play every position except like offensive line maybe. He had 3 rushing touchdowns, only 7 attempts, but he had 138 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. Absolutely insane. Marcus Valdes-Scantling with another good day. Only 2 receptions, but for 87 yards and a touchdown. Derek Carr threw for 2 touchdowns and 248 receiving yards. Browns receivers go off. Jerry Jeudy with a great game. Elijah Moore with a great game. David Njoku with a great game. Cedric Tillman with a decent game. Not what it's been in the past, but I think the Saints defense closed out the game getting interceptions. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's definitely interesting how the Saints did that there.
Yeah, Taysom Hill with the number 1 fantasy points for the Saints, obviously. He had the most out of the entire league, 41.52. Derek Carr with 18.72. Marcus Valdes-Scantling third with 16.7. Jameis Winston with 26.6. Jerry Jeudy with 26.2. And David Njoku with 19.8. I had David Njoku on my starting team. Next games. We have 2 more to talk about, and then we'll move on to, I'll just say the top fantasy players, and then we'll do some NASCAR. Vikings beat the Titans 23-13. They improved to 8-2. Titans go down to 2-8. Another one of those teams who's definitely done. Sam Darnold, 246 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Aaron Jones, 15 attempts for 39 rushing yards. Justin Jefferson, 6 receptions for 81 yards. Will Levis, 295 yards, a touchdown and interception. 7 attempts at 18 yards rushing for him. Saw that team, which is crazy. Nick Westbrook-Ikini, 2 receptions, 117 yards and a touchdown. Had that crazy 98-yard receiving touchdown. I think he's a good waiver pickup for fantasy football. He's had 5 touchdowns in the last 6 games. But Justin Jefferson, another disappointing fantasy. Again, another disappointing game. Jordan Addison left game with a calf cramp, I think it was. Could be wrong there, though. Top 3 performers for the Vikings. Sam Darnold, 23.64. Jordan Addison, 15.1. Justin Jefferson, 14.1. Then Titans, Nick Westbrook-Ikine, 19.7. Will Levis, 15.6. Calvin Ridley, 9.8. Falcons versus Broncos. Broncos crushed the Falcons 38-6. Put the Falcons at 6-5. Broncos improved to 6-5. Kirk Cousins with 173 yards and an interception with 12 attempts and 35 yards. Drake London with 3 receptions and 61 yards. Bo Nix with another one of those great rookie quarterbacks with a first-round pick. Went higher than most people thought, but he's turned out really good. Rookie from Oregon. He had 307 passing yards, 4 touchdowns. Javonte Williams with 9 attempts for 59 yards and a touchdown. Cortland Sutton, 7 receptions for 78 yards. Michael Penix Jr., the 8th overall draft pick. He's a rookie. Kirk Cousins, is the starter. Michael Penix is backup. They put Michael Penix in the end of the game. Thought he looked decent. Bo Nix had another great game, and I think he might be the best rookie quarterback of 2024 so far. You can argue Jane Daniels has been really good, but I think Bo Nix, Jane Daniels have had a rough end. Bo Nix had a rough start, but I think they're pretty even in that talk. Fantasy, Falcons 1-2-3 is Raymond McLeod 10.6, Bijan Robinson 10.3, Drake London 9.1, Broncos, Bo Nix 28.78, Lil Jordan Humphrey. I doubt was on anybody's team. If it was, good job for you. He had 15.2 points, and Clarence Sutton had 14.8. That's all for football, the Sunday games. Before I talk about NASCAR, though, what are your thoughts on the Steelers and Browns game, a divisional game? Steelers are 8-2, Browns are 2-8. Browns coming off with a good receiving game, losing to the Saints 14-35. Steelers coming off that win against the Ravens. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that'll definitely be pretty interesting. I think the Browns, they definitely are struggling this season. I think the Steelers, they're a top performer. I think they'll definitely do very well this season. They might not be Super Bowl caliber, but yeah, I think that they can definitely have some big success there. I think this will be an easy win for the Steelers. Obviously, if the Browns manage to pull it off, that'll be really cool, and that'll be a big comeback.
Yeah, I agree with that. Should be a good game. NASCAR. So, talk about the NASCAR news. Do you have anything to say on any news about like companies and anything like that?
Yeah, so Martin Truex Jr., a favorite driver. A lot of people liked him. He had a successful career, but now he's retiring from full-time NASCAR. He might do a couple Xfinity races in the future, but that'll be about it. Chase Briscoe, his team goes down. SHR is no longer in operation. They are done now. They are no longer going to support their 4 Fords on that team. It was a pretty strong team. They had a couple good things this season there. They obviously had Chase Briscoe, their star driver, and a couple other drivers that were pulling their weight there. So it's sad to see them gone. They have supported a lot of Ford drivers. I don't know what that means for other teams, so it might be a little bit of a smaller season next year, but a lot of things are going to be changing now that that's happened. Chase Briscoe, good driver. He wasn't on maybe the greatest team in the world, but he's now moving up to Joe Gibbs Racing, which is one of the top teams in the league right now. They lead pretty much all the other Toyotas out there, and they're definitely big competitors there. It's interesting that none of their drivers made it to the playoffs, though, considering how well all of them are. So,
yeah, they also have Josh Berry, and I forget who their other two is. It Ryan Preece that's on that team.
Yeah.
Be interesting to see where those drivers go before the season starts, if they go anywhere. We each listed our top 10 drivers. If you want to see Wyatt do all 34 of the full-time drivers, go over there to our other videos. It'll be under WC Sports podcast number 3, NASCAR Special, and he'll list all 34 of what he thinks are ranked from 34 to 1 of the full-time drivers of last season. But let's get into it. So who's your number 10? I know that if you've watched the video, you already know, but if you haven't, here they are.
Yeah, so Martin Truex Jr. is my top 10 pick. He obviously struggled a lot this season. He had a lot of bad luck. He didn't have a good pitting at Richmond in spring, and he ran out of gas at Sonoma. So I think he was still able to make it to the playoffs. He still had a strong finish at the short course tracks. And then I put number 9, Alex Bowman, 1 win during the season. He's definitely been not the star driver of Hendrick Motorsports. He's definitely been down there a bit and struggling.
Yeah. My number 10 is Alex Bowman, who you had number 9. I think he's a little lower. He hasn't been winning that many races. I know he won. I think it was the Chicago.
Yeah, it's the Chicago race.
The Chicago race, making the playoffs. I think he got knocked out I forget when he got knocked out. It was 16 or 12, but he did make it to the playoffs. And my number 9 is Martin Truex. So we switched on that one. I think Martin Truex didn't do good last season, but he did make the final 8. So yeah, who's your number 8? And then I'll list my number 8, and we'll alternate.
My number 8 is Chase Elliott. He had a decent performance. He made it to the round of 8, but I really hoped he would have done better, maybe gone to the playoffs, but it seems like he's had a struggle of a season this year. He was still able to win at Texas in the spring, so that was good to see.
Yeah.
But I think he can definitely up his game a little bit on certain tracks, just try and improve a little bit there on big races like Talladega or Daytona, something like that.
Yeah. I also had Chase Elliott in number 8, actually. Did make it to the round of 8, I think. Had a comeback season from what last season was. Had a terrible last season. Does need to win some races, though. But who's your number 7?
My number 7 is Denny Hamlin. He had a good season. He won at Richmond and Bristol, most notably. 3 wins this season. He almost made it to the playoffs, so that was good to see. And he made it into the round of 8, so that is interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I also had Denny Hamlin at number 7. Dislike him. Think great in NASCAR, but who's your number 6?
My number 6 is Christopher Bell. He would have been in probably the top 4 if he had made it to the playoffs. He had a strong season. He won at New Hampshire. He won at the Coca-Cola 600. I think that was his biggest win this season, and it was really cool to see that.
Yeah, my number 6 is Kyle Larson. I think had a pretty disappointing season. I think disappointing playoffs. His regular season had a lot of wins. His playoffs were disappointing. Didn't make the round of 4. So I think he is a good driver, but I don't think he can squeeze in the top 5 for me. Yeah, number 5.
My number 5 is Tyler Reddick. He had a strong performance at Homestead, Miami. He won at Talladega earlier that year. So it was really cool for him to see a driver who wasn't ranked very high for a win at Homestead just come and sweep a win to make it into the round of 4. Unfortunately, he was the 4th driver to finish in Phoenix, so he was the 4th out of all the other playoff drivers, so he didn't do that great at Phoenix. It's definitely a place where he can improve, but definitely a strong comeback at the end of the season for Tyler Reddick.
My number 5 is also Tyler Reddick. I think making that Final 4, he was the underdog. Him and William Byron were 2 underdogs. Were the last 2, but I think he was a good driver throughout the season. I think getting some wins there.
Yeah, my number 4 is William Byron. Won the Daytona 500, won at a road course, won at Martinsville, so some big races there. He made it into the playoffs, just barely edged out Christopher Bell, so that was good to see from him. He's a newer driver, doesn't have a lot of seniority like Joey Logano and Brian Blaney do, so it's good to see him making it to the playoffs because that really gives him some momentum for the next season.
Yeah, my number 3 is Christopher Bell. It's one of my favorite drivers. He's my sister's favorite driver, and he really seems really good throughout the season. He's obviously, like I said, win races, but he had number 6, so I think he's higher than that. What's your number 2?
My number 2 is did we go? My number 3, because I didn't go for number 3, is Kyle Larson. He had a strong season, 6 wins in the regular season. He was strong there. He obviously had some bad misfortune in the playoffs, so that was unfortunate to see. So he won the closest finish in NASCAR history. That also really put him up on the list there, so that was really cool to see.
Yeah, so I think I skipped number 4 in accident. My number 4 was also William Byron, so you're not missing a lot there. Who's your number 2? Just do number 2 right now.
My number 2 is Ryan Blaney. He won at Martinsville, so that was good chalk there. So yeah, that was definitely interesting how he was able to pull that off. He won at Pocono and Iowa, so he definitely came back in the second half of the season to easily redeem himself.
Yeah, my number 2 is also Ryan Blaney. He's my favorite driver. I think if he won on the championship, he would have been number 1, though. And who's your number 1?
Number 1 is obviously Joey Logano.
Yep.
He won the championship, had a strong comeback in the second half of the season. Wasn't a lot to see from him in the first half, so that's definitely another big comeback story for NASCAR this season.
Yeah, he's my number 1 as well, winning the championship. Yeah, so good driver. Yeah, so some good NASCAR. Those are our top 10 NASCAR picks. Let's move on to the NBA. We'll do that. Some NBA stuff. Cavaliers making history. They're the 4th team in NBA history to make 15-0. Beat the Hornets on Sunday to go 15-0. Play the Celtics at the time of recording. That's tonight for us at the time of recording. Might not be out by that time, but if it is, good. They play the Celtics, who are second in the Eastern Conference with an 11-3 record. But Timberwolves, they beat the Suns 120-117, and Julius Randle hits buzzer-beating three-pointer to win it. The Grizzlies beat the Nuggets 105-90, which is a good divisional matchup to go up in the standings. Mavericks upset the Thunder 121-119 to go 7-7 and make the Thunder go down to 11-3, and the Rockets smoked the Bills 143-107. James Harden shifts in the second all-time on three-point meter, so he has the second most three-pointers of all time, passes Ray Allen. And Wembanyama this past Wednesday became the fourth youngest player to score 50 points in a game. And now, what we're going to do to close out this episode, hopefully you guys have been enjoying it, I'm going to grade my off-season pickups so far, so guys that got traded or guys that got picked up. Number 1, Karl Anthony Towns, who went from the Timberwolves to the Knicks. I'm giving him a B so far. He's been not the most effective, but pretty effective, so it's cool to see him doing good. Mikal Bridges, who also went to the Knicks, a C+. Hasn't been doing the best, but I think is a decent trade for them. Julius Randle, who with that buzzer beater is having the best season of his career. That's an A+ for me. Went from the Knicks to the Timberwolves. He was part of that trade. And so is Dante DiVincenzo, who I'm giving a D+, who was also part of that trade, having a pretty bad season so far. Klay Thompson went from the Warriors to the Mavericks. I'm giving him an A. It's a pretty good trade for that, for the Mavericks, becoming a starter. DeMar DeRozan going to the Kings. I'm giving him an A, also being pretty effective. Chris Paul, I'm giving an A-. He went to the Spurs, being a help to Wembanyama, giving him a lot of assists. Russell Westbrook, a C-, went to the Nuggets as hopefully a good bench warmer. Has not been producing how they hoped. Buddy Hield, a B+, being pretty effective on the Warriors. And finally, Alex Caruso, a C, who's on the Thunder. So that should do it for today's podcast. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Yeah, so next podcast should be talking about the Thursday night game. You think that we're going to do that, right?
Yeah, and also to close out NASCAR, if you want, you can post your top 10 picks in the comments down below. That'd be cool to see what you guys think.
Yeah, that's a good point. Go over, if you want to see why it's all 34 starters, go over to WC Sports Podcast number 3, NASCAR Special, and you can see all of his top 34 starter picks. And yeah, so that should do it for today's podcast. Thanks for joining. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. It'd be super helpful to grow this channel, get other people to know about it if you liked it. So, thank you.